What's up, guys? I'm Chad Barnes, and welcome to the channel. Here, it's all about real car talk, from simple fixes to smart driving tips and keeping your ride in top shape. If that sounds good to you, go ahead and give the video a thumbs up. Hit that subscribe button and make sure you watch all the way through. There's a lot of good stuff coming. Let's get to it.
The first serial 5-door Sputniks appeared in auto stores and, accordingly, on the streets in 1987, and more or less mass production of this model began in 1988. For comparison, in 1987 Togliatti produced 25,069s against 124,125 copies of VAZ-2109 of all modifications, and the next year, 5-door Sputniks were made more than 8s, 101,345 PCs, and 90,240 PCs, respectively. Having taken the right place in the ranking table, the car demanded by consumers differed from the basic 3-door car only by the number of doors, while the design of the front end, and the equipment, and even the interior color remained familiar to the 0.8. On the photo, pre-production VAZ-2109 and its engine compartment. Almost in this form, the car started to be produced in 1987, another pre-production model. Note the absence of rear arch covers and grilles in the rear triangular windows, 2105 wheels, large lobes of rear mudguards, black interior, folding backrests of front seats and the original shape of the second row cushion. Nevertheless, visual and functional difference in the form of a pair of additional doors near the second row of seats gave rise to the opinion that the 9 is at least longer than VAZ-2108, and also has an elongated base. And the absolute majority of garage coryphees claimed that this car received a new body. Let's dispel doubts with the help of figures. The body length of any hatchback regardless of the number of doors is 4,006 mm, and their wheelbase of Samra with any type of body is 2,460 mm. Yes, complete bodies of 3-door and 5-door have different catalog numbers, 2108-500000-10 and 2109-50000014 respectively, but it is explained only by the fact that these cars have different sidewalls, which just accommodates one long, 1,264 mm, or two shorter, 1025 plus 885 mm, doors. That's it. 3 or 5 doors. It is important only when getting in and out, because in terms of space in the cabin both models were absolutely identical. The rest of the fundamental parts that form the body's power structure are the same in these cars. Thus, both roof and floor of VAZ-2108 and 2109 have the same number, 2108-5701012, roof panel, and 2108-5101024, trough of the floor. The roof on the 8 and the 9 was the same, as well as the floor panel. But the headliner was slightly different, but was absolutely interchangeable. Even the roof upholstery on the 9, despite its catalog number, differs only by a couple of small cutouts for the rear door openings, but it fits perfectly on the 8. Many owners found out about the fact that these cars have all these parts absolutely identical, for example, when they restored the shifter or re-welded the rotted underbody. VAZ-2109 is a natural link in the model range of the Samra family of cars. Firstly, IT is front-wheel drive with all its advantages. Secondly, IT is a 2-volume 5-door body, gravitating towards functional versatility. It allows you to do a lot of things with it, like opening all the doors at once and getting in from all sides quickly, or fold down the back seat and get a solid load in. In terms of loading height and luggage compartment volume, 330 litres, the 09 was completely identical to the 3-door car. However, the 3-door and 5-door bodies differed noticeably in one parameter. Because of the smaller number of openings, the 8 turned out to be noticeably stiffer. When measured for diagonal torsion, it produced 8,200 Nm per degree, while VAZ-2109, only 6,800 Nm per degree. However, it is still noticeably better than the 21,099 sedan with its 5,500 Nm per grad. In July 1986, an unusual car was parked in the center of Moscow, an English Austin Montego with a 2-liter engine. Its crew consisted of a couple of Portuguese journalists C. Fino and N. Vasco, who claimed that they were able to overcome the entire then united Europe from Lisbon to Moscow, which is almost 5,000 kilometers, in only 51 hours and 30 minutes. Their average speed exceeded 100 kilometers per hour, although they had to cross 7 borders, passing through 8 countries, including capitals with their traffic jams. The Portuguese did not limit themselves to this and sent a telex to the Union of Journalists of the USSR with a proposal to support the started challenge and make a return visit to Portugal. The organization of the run was undertaken by the editorial staff of the magazine ZA Rulium, working closely with the leader of the Soviet automobile industry, AvtoVAZ. It was decided to take the most modern and fresh model, for which the hype around the run could make additional advertising in Europe. The choice fell on a 1.5-litre 9, with the index 21093 and a 5-speed gearbox. In Togliatti, the journalists were given 2 identical cherry cars, from which after testing and running in on the test track they had to choose the one, which was to defend the honor of Soviet auto journalists in Europe. Both cars drove 2,500 kilometers at maximum speed in the non-stop mode on the high-speed ring of the Nome-Proving ground near Dmitrov, and no special modifications were intentionally planned. The only thing that distinguished Sputnik record holder from the standard car was a large chandelier of additional Hella headlights on the front and Michelin tires on Melba rims. Although Soviet tire makers persuaded to take experimental tires from NIHP, but the marathon participants did not risk to test their durability in extreme conditions. The crew included Viktor Panievsky, Vladimir Solovyov, and writing athlete Oleg Bogdanov. In parallel with the preparation of the car, psychologists and other doctors worked with the participants of the run, and special space food was selected and provided by the Research Institute of Medical and Biological Problems of the USSR Academy of Sciences. To arrive in Lisbon faster than the Portuguese reached Moscow, the Soviet journalists had to squeeze out of the 9, as they say, all the juice, keeping a steady speed of 150 to 170 km/h, and not on the speedometer, and the so-called speed pilot, an analogue of modern GPS. Not without confusions, having lost their way on unfamiliar autobahns, instead of Belgium the crew of the 9 managed to get to Holland. Then they had to make up for lost time with the help of gas pedal and skill. And it was needed, because the mountainous Spanish Serpentine was continuously watered by rain, which did not prevent our drivers to cover the last 900 kilometers in just 9 hours. Early in the morning of September 16, 1988, a Portuguese police officer recorded that the Soviet car with the number 09-1300 was indeed at the historic Balaam Tower in the center of Lisbon. This means that 4,827 kilometers 9 was able to overcome in 46 hours and 30 minutes, that is, faster than the Portuguese exactly 5 hours. And this is despite the fact that Austin was almost twice as powerful, 117 horsepower, as Sputnik, even 1.5 liter. Well, the Bogdanov-Panievsky-Solovyev crew returned back even faster, having traveled 4,811 kilometers in exactly 45 hours. As we have already found out in the first section, the first 9 externally differed from VAZ-2109 only by the number of doors and side windows, because on the side wall there were small neat non-empty windows triangles with grills of exhaust ventilation in the lower corner. But the front of 3- and 5-door versions were absolutely identical, the same beak and plastic mask ski. From the front and from behind, the first 9 did not differ from VAZ-2109. The fenders are so-called short, that is, they together with the hood did not reach the headlights, which were framed by the same ski. By the way, such a solution could be found not only on the Soviet Sputnik, for example, the front end of the DeLorean DMC-12. However, many owners were so irritated by the notorious parrot nose that the factory grille on new cars was immediately replaced with anything, cooperative products, homemade products, sawed-off parts from a VAZ-77, therefore, the cover of the April issue of ZA Rule for 1989 made a real sensation in the ranks of reading car enthusiasts, because it showed a silver-colored 9, with a new front, fenders, and hood, which reached right up to the blockfar. Moreover, the hood even went a little on the vertical plane, so there was a small neat grille between the headlights. In addition, an attentive eye when studying the cover could notice the unavailable on the production car's silver body color, rear spoiler and full-size hubcaps, and in the cabin, the rear headrests and some not-so-dashboard caught the eye. VAZ-21093, a new modification of the front-wheel drive family Lada Sputnik. Exactly this sentence could be read between the photos, and the article in the magazine itself told about the features of this modification. And it was to receive microprocessor ignition, mold trunk trim, right exterior mirror, metallic paint and much more. In fact, in 1990 this luxury version was planned to be equipped with a carburetor with auto pump, a new steering wheel and dashboard, with BSC system and even with electric windows and door locks. Cars with such a front appeared on the streets in 1991. Note, the first copies still had a grille of exhaust ventilation in the rear triangle, second photo. However, it did not have much to do with serial cars, and the equipment of the 9 did not depend on the installed engine. Grey-black interior shades appeared in 1989 on all modifications of 2108 and 2109, and there was no correlation between the type of front mask and engine volume. In the early years, most 1.5 had short fenders and beak, and the ultra-fashionable long fender on serial Sputniks. SAMARs appeared around 1991, and it could be found both on cars with 2108 engine and on 1.5-litre 93rds. Short or long fender far from always depended on the modification of the engine. But the new front end was much more common on the 9 cars. It is interesting that the modification 21093-01, short wing, in 1989, cost 9,200 rubles, while for a 1,300 cubic inch 9 in the auto store you had to pay a little less, 8,900 rubles. Of course, Soviet motorists did not pay attention to the working volume, rejoicing at any modification. Short wings were produced until 1994, and then all SAMARs were equipped with an exclusively long wing, and since 1993 the early grille gave way to the so-called Adidas, a detail of a new pattern with 3 horizontal bars. At first, the new grille was painted in body color, and in the late 90s it became just black. In this case, the 1,300 cubic inch 9, albeit in the guise of a long wing, stayed on the assembly line until 1996 inclusive, and then all cars of the pre-injector era, regardless of the number of doors, were equipped only with a 1.5-litre 70 horsepower engine with an index of 21,083. Historically, all rear-wheel drive VAZ models became real assembly line long livers. Thus, representatives of the first family stayed on the assembly line until 1988 in the form of VAZ-2109, although the pure one was taken out of production in 1983. Other Jiguli were also not lagging behind. The 6, which hit the roads of the country back in 1976, was produced in Togliatti until 2001, and in general, until 2006, and the 5 and 7 remained in service until 2010 and 2012. Respectively, that is exactly 30 years each. It is not surprising that front-wheel drive Ladas not only survived their own country, but also managed to catch the new millennium in car dealerships. After all, 88 was produced at VAZ for exactly 20 years, from the end of 1984 to 2004. But the 9 on its native Togliatti assembly line lasted a little less, from 1987 to the same 2004. However, do not jump to conclusions. Unlike the small door model, the 5-door Samara was produced in neighboring Ukraine, and not only from ready-made kits, but also fully welding the bodies from scratch and assigning them their own VIN number. This happened at the Zaporizhzhia automobile plant until the end of 2011. That is, the 9 still overtook its older sister with the index 2108 in terms of longevity. It is interesting that in Togliatti itself 9 was stopped producing in connection with the release of the restyled version VAZ-2114, so the plant tried to avoid internal competition between the old and updated models. That is why just in 2004 the production was transferred to the Ukrainian plant AvtoVAZ. In the third myth, we have already found out that in addition to the basic 1,300 cubic meters model there was also a 1.5 with the index 21093. However, especially for some European markets, VAZ went to the unpopular at that time solution, downsizing it was connected with the peculiarities of taxation in the Benelux countries, when the annual amount of fees for the engine up to 1.2 litres was noticeably less than for 1.3 litre. With the purpose of Samara promotion in Western Europe, and receipt of such a desirable currency in the Soviet treasury, VAZ was not lazy and made 1,100 cubic meters engine, which received the index 21081. Structurally, it practically did not differ from the usual 8-gear engine, but in order to reduce the working volume it was shortened the stroke of standard 76mm pistons. This was achieved by using 2 original parts, crankshaft and low cylinder block, the height of which was reduced by 5.6mm. As a result, the engine power fell from 64 to 53 horsepower, and to compensate for the defortification of the engine, the designers used a short main gear with a gear ratio of 4.13 instead of 3.9 on the standard 8. This engine was not supplied to the domestic market and became well known to Russian and Ukrainian motorists in the 90s, when used 8 and 9 with such motors began to be imported to the CIS. But the heavy-duty 1,600 cubic inch motor, about which some garage connoisseurs like to speculate, theoretically existed, but in no way in the form of a finished serial product, installed on the main assembly line. And the legs of this motor grow from the late 80s, when already well known to us Vladimir Anatolovich Yartsev was engaged in Belgium in the creation of heated hatchback Lada Samara RSI. The supercharged car was to differ from the usual Samara not only by its eye-catching appearance, but also by its heart. To begin with, they wanted to cheer it up with a rather high-tech method, installation of distributed fuel injection, which was supposed to raise the maximum power up to 80 horses. Simultaneously with the work on the future Samara, with the Index RSI representatives of Skaldia Volga negotiated with motorists and management of the Volga Motor Works regarding the supply of a 1.6-litre engine, which, taking into account the injection and modified phases of gas distribution, was to give quite decent for the hot hatch of the 80's 110 horsepower. Such an experimental 1,600 cubic inch motor was even installed on the 9, but not commodity, and a personal car of Yartsev himself. Well, this engine was never put into serial production. Nevertheless, 1.6-litre motors for the first-generation Samara still existed. And let the myth claims that they were put directly on the assembly line, we will dot all the I's. The engine VAZ-2109 with a working volume of 1,580 cubic centimeters was produced in the OPP AvtoVAZ and was supplied as a spare part, as well as installed on the Samara by individual order. The addition of 100 cubic centimeters for courage was obtained in the same way as downsizing of the 1300 engine, but in reverse. That is, they used a high cylinder block, plus 1.2 millimeters, and the original crankshaft with an increased radius of the crank, thanks to which the stroke of the piston with a standard for 1.5 diameter of 82 mm increased from 71 to 74.8 mm. This allowed to achieve good indicators of maximum power, 93 horsepower, and torque, 124 Nm. But this is not all. 9 at the end of its career still received a 1,600 cubic inch motor, but it happened not in Russia, but already in Zaporozhye. Since Ukrainian Samaras were assembled from Russian kits, after the withdrawal from production of 1.5-litre 8-valve engine 2111, it happened in January 2007, the Ukrainian manufacturer was also forced to transfer its cars to a 1,600 cubic inch engine VAZ-2109-20, which visually differed from the previous engine plastic intake manifold. Simultaneously with the new heart, the car received an updated interior from the VAZ-2114. It was in this form that the 5-door Samara became the property of history at the end of 2011. However, let us repeat, the Ukrainian cars were not directly related to the Tolyatti 9, which was taken out of production 7 years earlier, differing from them even by body markings. If we have dealt with the Ukrainian trace in detail in the previous sections, the European pages of history have managed to grow their own myths over several decades. For example, some experts claim that the 9 was produced in Germany, although the imported Deutsche Lada only carried out deep dealer refinements, dealer modifications, installing original wheels, aerodynamic bodywork, changing upholstery, and so on. Yes, the Germans could take and repaint a brand new black Samara just because they were not satisfied with the shagreen or the number of small defects of paintwork, unpainted, polished and sand grains, as well as install on it a system to reduce toxic emissions. But the car remained produced in the USSR. The story of the Belgian model called Lada Kalota, whose founding father was the same Vladimir Anatolievich Yartsev, was a bit different. Not so long ago, we recounted in detail the history of its creation. Unlike their German colleagues, the representatives of the Skaldia Volga S.A. company, after all the metamorphoses, stamped their own identification plate on the Kalota's body. Thus, the Belgian 9 could be considered as a car conventionally produced in Degem, but not in Tolyatti. But the so-called Finca or Lada Baltic can be considered a full-fledged European car with all grounds, because all 100% of produced cars were not only fully painted and assembled at Valmet Automotive plant, but also refined some parts. Thus, to improve the appearance in Finland, they removed external welds in the connection of the body sidewall with the roof panel. The GL version differed by original bumpers, another grille, and an insert in place of the rear license plate, which moved to the bumper. In the interior, the Baltic VAZ-2109 with the usual low panel differed from the standard 9, with a special overlay on the top. Of the torpedo, original door trim and a different shape of seats, which from the standard chairs remained only frames. The engine is only 1.5-litre injection engine 2111 with a catalytic converter, because at that time in Europe there were already negative €2 environmental standards. From 1996 to 1998, about 14,000 Lada Baltic were produced at Valmet, although according to the project a 3-year contract was supposed to produce about 20,000 9s annually in Uusikaupunki, for which the Finns themselves invested about $20 million in Eurosamra. The most interesting feature of this model was not even the air conditioner, which was theoretically available on export Samra's back in the 80s, but airbag. Yes, in the interior of Samra with a Finnish accent, there appeared all Volkswagen airbag with a rook on the hub, in which there was airbag produced by TRW company. Thus, the 09th has all grounds to be considered a car produced not only in the USSR, Russia, and CIS countries, but also in Western Europe. In conclusion, the VAZ-2109 stands as a fascinating example of automotive engineering, blending European assembly techniques with a powerful engine that has captured the imagination of car enthusiasts. While myths surrounding its speed records often exaggerate its capabilities, the facts reveal a vehicle that, despite its limitations, has made a significant impact in the automotive world. Understanding the true story behind the VAZ-2109 allows us to appreciate its legacy and the role it played in shaping the landscape of compact cars. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the myths and facts of the VAZ-2109.